Kia ora, and welcome to the Dawn Chorus for Thursday, the 31st of October. I'm Bernard Hickey for the Kaka. This is my daily podcast that goes out with an email newsletter and also as a video for paying subscribers about Aotearoa's political economy. I focus on housing, climate, and poverty. I wanted to point out to people just how different our economy is performing at the moment, and just to push back against the idea that somehow our long-running now, we're getting into our third year of economic stagnation or recession per capita, is somehow natural, inevitable, unable to change. Often the way that an economic downturn is characterized is that this is something that's come out of the clear blue sky and usually from overseas, and there's not much we can do about it. Say, for example, the global financial crisis, which rightly no one here can argue was caused by New Zealand. We also, for example, during the global financial crisis of 2008, 9, 10, we actually had a drought starting in 2007. And we had the collapse of a bunch of finance companies, which also dragged the economy into a recession. The recession we're having now is deeper and faster than the recession that we had in 2008, 2009 in a per capita sense and also in a retail spending sense. Now, that is obviously partly because of very high interest rates through 2022 and 2023 and now into this year, as the cumulative effect and the lagged effect has rolled into 2024 and has hit hard. But the driving factor in what really you'd call a crunch in our economy was the decisions by the government to firstly suspend or stop building of new homes, new schools and hospitals through Kāinga Ora Health NZ and the Ministry of Education, and then to embark on a fiscal tightening, which Treasury has described as the most aggressive we've seen per capita in our history. So that means we are now undergoing a fiscal tightening at the moment over the next 2 to 3 years, bringing the government's budget deficit back into surplus by 2027, 2028, and reducing net public debt from over 40% to closer to 30%. And we're doing that in an awful hurry, so much faster and deeper than even during the 1991 to 1993 period that followed the mother of all budgets. Now, this is because the government says that we can run the government more efficiently and that it wants to get the size of government under 30% of GDP. The trouble is, to do that is having to make real cuts in spending. And in today's email, I include some quotes from a tauranga cardiologist who's just quit because of burnout, saying that Lester Levy, the new commissioner for Te Whatu Ora Health NZ, is living in La La Land, and that the reason the health system is really struggling is because so many people are doing more than one job at once, and that the current system is only sustainable if people work many, many more hours than is healthy or that they're paid for. And this is just the start of this very hard crackdown on government spending. And this is different. So in the rest of the world, governments are running relatively loose, certainly much looser than here, fiscal policies. They are investing in infrastructure, manufacturing, and you're seeing much more robust jobs markets. And we are seeing, as we've seen in Australia, continued jobs growth, economic growth. And as we saw last night from the United States, economic growth, which is running at nearly 3%. Now, this is extraordinary after 3 years of very tight monetary policy. And it's largely because of a very loose fiscal policy by the Biden administration, which through the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act has invested heavily in electrification and in essentially bringing manufacturing back to the United States. And that has driven a relatively soft landing for the United States. So this idea that New Zealand is inevitably having a downturn because everyone else is having a downturn simply isn't true. So I wanted to show you some charts which give you an idea of just what's going on. So GDP per capita has essentially been falling since 2021 and has significantly fallen in the last year or so, and looks like it will fall again in the September quarter and in the December quarter. And when you look at the long-term history, it is a bigger and faster fall than we saw in the 2008-2009 recession. And just to give you a sense of how that's different from everywhere else, you can see the blue line, that's New Zealand, that's GDP per capita, and you can see we're dropping off at the end of that chart, getting into 23, 24, while the green and red lines, Australia and the United States, are rising. And to give you a sense of how much of a fiscal tightening this is a chart from Treasury showing the green line, which is the expected reduction in real government spending per capita. And that is a dramatic fall through the next 3 to 4 years, and a bigger fall than what we saw after the 1991 to 93 recession, which was deepened by the mother of all budgets unleashed by Ruth Richardson. Again, just to show you the difference, we are the dark bar, the green bar is Australia. Our employment growth is now negative, as they say, whereas in Australia they're still continuing to see positive employment growth. Now, one of the arguments the government makes is that we have no choice in this. We have a fiscal crisis. We can't afford the debt, and this is simply wrong. So what you're seeing there is a chart showing interest paid on public debt as a percentage of GDP. And you can see since 1910, so this chart goes back more than 100 years, we did have very high debt in the immediate aftermath of the First World War, and obviously during the global depression, we had a problem with our government debt, and it was at that point all foreign debt which needed to be serviced. So that was a difficult period. However, there was continued economic growth through the late 30s and right through to the 60s and 70s. In the 80s and 90s, it rose under Muldoon, and we had Think Big, and the interest paid on public debt rose very sharply. And that's because it was denominated in foreign currencies at floating rates. So when interest rates rose and the New Zealand dollar was devalued, you saw a massive increase in the debt servicing cost, and certainly relative to GDP. And it rose very quickly, in particular just before, just around 1990. And that's one of the reasons New Zealand was threatened with a double notch downgrade by Standard & Poor's, and which led in part to the mother of all budgets of 1991, when Ruth Richardson slashed benefits and many other government costs, arguing that we had to do it to continue to stay solvent as a country. That is not the case now. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. Firstly, we issue debt in our own currency. We also have much lower interest rates. And just as a share of GDP, it's a much lower number. So there is absolutely no need or justification for a more aggressive fiscal tightening than what we saw in 1990. And this is flowing through to the economy, of course. And I've included some charts in today's email newsletter from the IMF, from their fiscal monitor that came out earlier this week, showing what happens when you have an untargeted bunch of spending cuts by the government, how that essentially produces $2 of GDP reduction for every $1 of reduction in government spending, because there is a multiplier effect. And also it shows that an untargeted reduction in government spending is much more damaging to the economy than an increase in tax revenues. It also shows that the effects on the poorest is much tougher when you have an untargeted reduction in government spending than, let's say, an increase in a tax rate. I'm Bernard Hickey. That was today's Storm Chorus for Thursday, the 31st of October. Ka kite anō.